What is up? You're about to see top 7 most unbelievable checkmates that nevertheless happened in thousands of games, and even world's best players fell victims to these traps. The very first one occurs in the two knights game, the most common chess opening, where white goes for this fried liver attack. And therefore, you've got a great opportunity to actually pull off this trap in your own games. Initially, you close the diagonal by going pawn d5, but after they recapture, instead of taking the pawn, you suddenly move the other knight forward. Now, at this point, they realize that they would wish to grab this pawn, however, the pawn is on the way. But then they come up with an idea of sacrificing the pawn to renewing this threat to the pawn. You kind of pretend like you walk right into their trap by going queen takes d6. At this point, they happily grab the pawn with their knight, but that is a decisive mistake, even though they're actually here having this false impression that they're winning the game, but the opposite is true. After queen to c6, all of a sudden, you're the one winning. Somehow, it's not easy to explain, but there's no way out for white from here. You're attacking this bishop, you're attacking this pawn on g2, maybe queen to e4 check is coming, and also the bishop cannot easily retreat because it has to guard this knight on f7. It is just way too fragile and white can hold on to their position. In most cases, they're going to continue and simply grab this rook on h8, but then you play queen takes g2, hitting this knight on this rook on h1. They have to move it, and after this, what's crazy is that this position occurred in about 100,000 times. Just think about this. This is absolutely insane. But here after queen to e4 check, followed by this knight to f3 stunning checkmate by knight, that is completely absurd. In chess, it feels impossible to deliver two checks by playing a single move because you can't play two moves at the same time. However, that is kind of what you're doing in the following trap that occurs from the king's gambit, and then you play knight to f3, developing a knight and also covering this square. After that, they attack you in the middle of the board, and you defend this pawn by going knight to c3. Now, after this straight on e4, many of your opponents will be tempted to play bishop g4 just because they love this pin, and then you play queen e2. They might be willing to take right here on f3. It's a standard idea of black in the king's gambit. After this knight disappears, they're free to play queen h4 check, which really feels unpleasant for white. However, at this point, you don't recapture the bishop by either queen or pawn, but instead you deliver this double check and a checkmate move with knight to f6, which will definitely catch your opponents off guard. Karjakin played the World Championship match against Carlsen, but he became even more famous for the disaster that happened to him in the following game. Andreikin is playing white against Karjakin, who is playing black, and initially it looks like standard opening moves, but here, instead of recapturing the pawn, all of a sudden Andreikin deviates and jumps with his knight forward to d5. Karjakin continues with his plan, bishop g7, which also guards this pawn on d4, however white goes bishop g5, attacking the queen. And now, though black has a wide range of options of how to cover, none of them seem to be very appealing. For example, if they go pawn f6, then white would slide back with their bishop, and now this bishop on g7 is dull, the king is exposed, and all that looks awkward. Therefore, in the actual game, Karjakin decided to play a much more natural move, knight to e7. Looks like black is fully covered, but here white starts the hurricane. He first sacrifices the knight here on d4. Looks strange, but what can black do? He can't take it with the knight because that would allow bishop takes e7, and all of a sudden the queen is trapped right on its original square. Therefore, instead, Karjakin captured this by the bishop. However, here white continues playing brilliant moves by sacrificing the queen. This time queen takes d4, offering the queen to be captured. And it turns out that black can't do that, because if the queen was accepted, white will play knight f6 check, followed by this really unusual bishop h6 checkmate. In the actual game, Karjakin noticed that and tried to escape with castling, because also he's got to cover this rook, therefore he decided to castle. But white continued with knight f6 check, and on the next move he played knight g4, sacrificing the queen for the second time in a row. And this game is just completely crazy if you think about this. Like, first of all, normally you're advised not to move a single piece twice in an opening. However, this knight is just horsing around, playing all these moves, and white is winning the game. Also, it's super rare to sacrifice a queen and to deliver a checkmate by a knight and bishop. And here, white managed to do these both things 2 times within a single game. The next trap arises from the Scandinavian Defense. At this point, we're attacking the queen, and the most played move by black is queen to d8. After this, you play your pawn in the center, they go knight c6, attacking the pawn, you defend it with your own knight, and then many of them will play bishop to g4. pinning the knight and therefore renewing the threat to this pawn on d4. Now, at this point, while facing this pin, most of the players actually play this passive move bishop to e2, which is an okay move, but certainly an inferior option compared to a number of other options that white has. It is much stronger to play pawn d5, counter-attacking black. By the way, I understand that you can't memorize all these variations, and this is certainly unnecessary. Instead, what you may do is to check out my free masterclass where I'm sharing with you a few simple ideas on how to find those attacking moves in your own games, and I'll drop a link to that masterclass below the video in the description. Anyway, after d5, in most cases black will play knight e5, still having this false impression that the knight is pinned and therefore cannot move. Therefore, they're trying to add more pressure to the knight. However, at this point, the knight got sick and tired that everyone is trying to take advantage of him, and he decided that it's time for revenge. Therefore, white sacrifices a queen here on d1 and follows up with bishop b5 check. This thing actually wins the game on the spot. Black has to cover with pawn to c6, but then after white captures, it turns out that white threatens to move this pawn forward one way or the other, opening up this discover check, and black has no way of stopping it. For example, if he tries queen c7 to blockade the pawn, white would then capture this pawn, opening up the discover check, and after the king moves, of course, 99% of players would just grab the rook and promote their opponent to a new queen. However, let's not forget that the knight was really pissed off and decided to take its revenge, right? And therefore white found the move knight takes f7 checkmate. The next trap occurs from the Philidor defense. Here white usually goes bishop c4, but you can surprise them by going pawn to f5, attacking their center. Now at this point white certainly could capture this pawn, but that only helps black to develop their bishop, and therefore it's not the best move for white. The best move for white is actually to play pawn d4, counter-striking in the center, trying to blow up the position here and take advantage of your centralized king, which can't easily castle. To this, black can capture on d4, let's say white captures on f5, and at this point you can make this little but very annoying move queen to e7 check. Because think about this, white was ready to just castle, put the rook to e1, and probably checkmate you really quickly. However, after you played queen e7, looks like white can easily cover from this check, but there is no convenient option. White would really wish to play something like bishop e3 and then castle, but they can't do it right now because your pawn controls that square. Similarly, they don't want to bring their bishop from this active position backwards to a more passive position. They do not want to play queen e2 and allow you to trade off queens and then to pick up this pawn, and then you have a nice position. Also, they do not want to play king to f1 because after that their own king is centralized, and more importantly it blocks out the rook, which can't get to this e-file trying to pin your queen. For that reason, the most played move in this position is actually king d2, which looks weird, but it certainly makes sense. White just wants to play rook e1 and win the game. To this, you can reply with another move, pawn to g6, which is an extremely smart, dumb-looking move. It looks like you just totally ignore your development, weaken your king, play a bunch of pawn moves, and you do all wrong things. Looks like white can just win the game by going rook e1, and they do that. At this point, they think that they're getting your queen, but you actually got their king. You play bishop h6 check, and strangely enough, you win the game, using all these weird moves that you played before that. Now, the king has only one square, is the square forward, but after that, you score the king forward. Bishop takes f5, forcing the king forward, then bishop g7, yet another check, and again, the king just cannot go back because of your two snipers. It has to go forward, and now c6 is a nice move as the Karjakin when you played on the first move of the game, but of course it's much nicer when it's the last move of the game. The next checkmate is absolutely epic. Here, after we enter the Scandinavian Defense, one of the main variations, black plays standard opening moves, pawn h3, and here some of your pawns will drop the bishop back, but that allows you to expand with g4, knight e5, and start your kingside attack. Therefore, many of them will actually choose the simplest option and simply trade off on f3. After this, both sides continue their development. So far so good. Bishop b4, they're putting the pressure down here and pinning the knight. White may try to play a3 to get rid of this pin. However, at this point, black realized that, hey, this pawn is actually pinned, and therefore white can't take the bishop. Therefore, there is no need for black to trade or do anything. They can just continue with their own development, and they castled. But that was certainly a step in the wrong direction, because white played the first brilliant move, sacrificing the whole rook, which black can capture while delivering check, which looks totally bad for white. However, white played another unexpected move, king to d2, allowing black to capture the other rook on h1, and black actually has to do that, because otherwise white will do the opposite and will capture the queen. Therefore, black has to do that. But after this, white keeps sacrificing stuff with queen takes c6. And this leads to this stunning checkmate by 2 bishops after white sacrificed virtually everything else that they had. And although this position looks totally fantastic, this exact position occurred in 39 different games. The following game was played last month between Caruana playing white against Firouzja playing black, and it was truly spectacular. But of course, the fun fact about this is that the very same trap occurred in multiple games prior to this one. Anyway, it's still interesting that even Firouzja, one of the very best players in the world, still fell victim to this trap. Now queen b3 puts pressure to this pawn, and black tries to cover that, but now white captures on d5. Now black realizes that if they recapture, white would win the pawn with their queen. Therefore, black realizes that they need to trade queens first. And after that, they realize that although they could take right here on d5, but that is slightly unpleasant because white can go knight c3, hit this pawn, and then jump to b5, possibly threatening c7 square or that a7 pawn, and that whole thing does not look very comfortable. Therefore, in the game, instead of capturing on d5, Firouzja played bishop e4, which actually looks much better at first glance. This hits the rook, and after white would defend it somehow, black would capture this pawn on d5 by the bishop, keeping their own pawn structure intact, and after that they would also attack these pawns. b3 looks like black is doing absolutely fine. However, white surprises black by playing pawn takes c6, sacrificing the rook. And after that, they don't stop, but they sacrifice the other rook by playing rook takes a7. What the heck is going on here? And of course, the whole combination is so unusual that even Firouzja missed it. The point is that after rook takes, this pawn, this tiny little pawn wins the game. It goes forward with pawn to c7, and black cannot do anything. White threatens either to capture the knight or just to play pawn c8 with a checkmate to the king, and black is defenseless. If you want to learn how you can become such a strong attacking player yourself, check out the free masterclass by clicking the link up there and answering another common question that students ask me: how to study chess efficiently even if you have little time for chess. Check out this video where I provide to you a complete blueprint of effective chess study.